Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining our session. Thank you for having us over. We're very excited to share our experience and perhaps impart a little bit of knowledge with you. I'll start with myself. As my name is on the screen, my name is Seta Kajarian. I serve as the Accreditation Liaison Officer for Pepperdine University. I've been in this role. I also chaired the Department Office of Institutional Effectiveness and Assessment. I've been at Pepperdine about 7 years as faculty and or staff, but I've also attended Pepperdine for my doctoral studies. And in my role, as you could imagine, we guide university-wide assessment. And in my role as the ILO, I had and support all the accreditation efforts. I'll turn it over to my wonderful team member, Terrence.
All right. Well, hi, everyone. I'm Terrence. I'm the Associate Director of Special Projects here at Pepperdine University. In this specific role, I have been here now almost 6 months. So yeah, time flies, Seta. But with Pepperdine, I've been here for longer. I started as a certification manager where I worked with the teacher preparation program on credential counseling, eventually getting into accreditation work as well, due to some state accreditation standards. That eventually led me to our Office of Institutional Effectiveness, where I started getting more into assessment and accreditation on a higher level. So with that note, I see that we've got a healthy audience coming in here. Yeah, I see besides us, there's 18 of us. So we'll take a moment for you all in the Zoom chat if you want to just type out, yeah, what's your name, what's your role, how long have you been at your institution or in your role? And well, maybe we won't need to do it as a Zoom poll. We'll just ask that as a question, just getting a feel. When do you know about the last time your institutional learning outcomes were last revised? So we'll just give it a few moments, let people type in the chat the prompt on the screen.
And it is absolutely acceptable answer if you say you're not aware of the last time your ILOs were revised.
Welcome. Yeah, I hear people tuning in. So us tuning in, just we're doing some quick introductions via chat. So the prompts are on the screen. Let's see. So Seta, seems like someone shares our experience. I see Kimberly saying our ILOs are sorely outdated, something we'll be talking about later. Okay. Very
Wow.
cool. Other directors of institutional effectiveness from New York, from Arizona, nursing faculty. Oh, interesting. We have one school that says they need ILOs. Okay. Well, another that says they have brand new college learning goals. Fascinating. Wow. Thank you all
Hello,
for sharing.
Marisol. I see you. I'm glad I know one person in the audience. I'm very excited. Shout out.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you all. As you continue typing this in, I'm glad we get a chance to briefly know each other. Just to make sure we get through our content, I'm just going to hop over to the next slide. So we'll talk about what we're going to be going over in this session. Mainly, we're going to talk about just overall challenges and best practices as we look at refining institutional learning outcomes, and just making sure they're the most updated and best shape possible for your institution. And thus also taking that to the next step, right? We're not just writing the ILOs, we actually need to do something about them and bring them into the assessment space. So we'll also talk about the challenges and best practices in that assessment piece as well, which what we're going to be doing is we'll just start with talking about what are the ILOs, why are they important. We'll give a little case study of our own ILO revision project before covering some specific challenges and then going over how to assess ILOs and just some lessons learned that can hopefully be passed on as wisdom to all of you, as well as next steps and considerations for the future. Which on that note, Seta, you want to talk about what are ILOs?
We thought about how to start this to engage our audience. One of the things that I wanted to revisit is, and probably you all know based on what you shared so far, that the way we looked at the ILOs are really the institutional learning outcomes. So we focus so much on rubrics, on class learning outcomes, and the syllabus objectives. And it's often, I don't know if the alignment exists at all institutions, but I know that it has been a challenge for us and some of the folks in assessment that I was fortunate to engage with. So this was kind of a reminder for all of us that the ILOs are really the higher level from where the program learning outcomes should align with. So every time we have a new program offering, we're hoping that they do this work and our institution, we do this work. We create that ILO mapping to the PLO mapping. And then with faculty, we hope with every course that they are designing, delivering, teaching, adding those objectives, that the alignment is there. So with the ILOs, as you know, it's the higher level learning outcomes, and it is the one that is really tied to the mission. So it's kind of the interpretation of the mission. We looked, I'm very happy to say one of our colleagues, or I had an opportunity to meet with, Dan Shapiro, has mentioned clearly the connection of the ILO to the institutional mission. So with that, one of the things that I wondered, what do you think is an ideal number of ILOs for an institution? Feel free to type in if you like. Is there an ideal number, do you think? So you could answer yes, no ideal number, no, or maybe throw a number there. And I can tell you why I'm asking this question. Indeed, yes. 9 is way too many if I say that. Okay, good. Less than 6. So just based on some of these comments, it's really comparable with some of the research that we had to do in preparation of our revision. So next slide, Terrence. So I would like to share with you our experience. So with like some of you, when we looked at our ILOs, we realized that the last it was revisited was a good 20 years prior to 2021. And you're thinking, how did this come about? Because when we started auditing our PLO to ILO maps, we noticed we had 9 and there was some redundancy. And of course, you all know we don't have enough to do, so we took on another project. It's like, let's audit, let's revisit. And it is a lot of work. So anyone thinking about doing this, just do it, but know that it's not going to happen overnight. So we had to do a lot of deep work. And one of the work that we did, we looked into our peers and then some aspirational schools. So looking at 37 peer or aspirational universities, we noticed that some had 11, some had 7, some had 2. But if we were to average it, most had between 4 and 5. So we thought, if we can bring our ILOs from 9, which was really not manageable to assess, into 5, and that would have forced us to audit our PLO to ILO maps of all our programs, we would be in such a good place because that's part of the best practices, right? We just don't want to do it and have it have a shelf life. So another thing that was very important for our institution, that we wanted to make sure that the 9 ILOs that existed would be revised, reworded, but not fully changed, because it was very closely connected to our institutional mission, and we were not going to change that. So I see, like in our work and homework, I realized and had an opportunity to have colleagues reach out from other schools, and I reached out to other colleagues. If the intention was to change them completely, it would have created misalignment with their mission. And if the mission was something to change, as some of you know, that will require structural change with your accreditor. So we were not in that position anyway. So it was wonderful that ours was more an issue of looking at revising them, rewording them, making them more practical, quantifiable to assess, better aligned, reducing redundancy. Even with that work, internally, it takes a long time, as you could imagine. So with the purpose of reducing and rephrasing, we embarked on a 2-year mission. For us, 2 years, 2.5 years worked very well. I know that when I had an opportunity to talk to the wonderful ILO at Cal State Long Beach, they did it within a year. But their purpose was more to reflect larger to their mission. But for us, it was really capturing the 9 within 5 with a better rephrasing. So few months of prep time, planting the seed at like university-wide committees, getting some buy-in, we started this. So just to give you an idea, so that we had 6 months of prep work where, we were doing the homework. What is best ILOs? How can we revise? Who has how many? Where's the literature on it? Who is doing this? So for us, we partnered with university-wide committees, got their feedback, solicited feedback, reduced the number of the existing 9 ILOs. We condensed them into 5. And not that 5 is a magical number. It worked for us. But I've usually seen that 5 is somehow a good number. We had a very intentional outreach to all our community members. We sent, after they were reduced, initially we reduced them to 6, send it over to our community members. We got great feedback, wrote a report about the feedback, analyzed it. From there, we realized we could do them 5 based on the feedback. We ended up with 5. So this was a good 1.5 year work. We didn't rush this. We wanted to do it right. We didn't want to check a box. We wanted to include, it was a great opportunity to remind all the programs, faculty, staff about what the ILOs are, because we felt we knew they existed. Nobody knew what to do with them. And then into year 2, Terrence, you wanna?
Yes. So in year 2, we had our new ILOs, and now it was time to actually take them into action. So what we did then was reach back out to each school within Pepperdine and find whoever the assessment coordinator was and talk to them about uh, reaching out to their faculty and taking a look at previous alignments between their program learning outcomes and the old ILOs and seeing how that could be mapped over to the new ILOs. Something that did help throughout this process was that we had a guide which approximated which of the new ILOs were similar to the old ILOs. And same thing, we did a little bit of draft work and made sure to just say, this is draft work. And in that sense, trying to frame for each school and their faculty that, okay, there's initial legwork that's already been done. So for your side of things, it's really more so just review and final feedback and revision rather than just saying, oh, we need you to do something all by yourself, which can come off as a larger workload. And something else we had also talked about was how can we make sure ILOs are intentionally included in these annual assessment reports so that they can be naturally covered each year, not just, oh yeah, it's this thing we did by aligning, making a new alignment and then kind of forgetting about it. So making sure it's all integrated. I see, Seta, you wanted to add something?
Yes, so based on some of the comments I'm seeing, so 2 things were very important. Is one, we wanted to assess ILOs. And there wasn't an easy way when you had 9 and things were not aligned or audited or updated, right? The other thing we thought, how can we make this successful? Because faculty, are busy. This may not be their expertise. One of the things that we took upon ourselves, which really helped, we updated all the PLO to ILO maps ourselves, sent it back to the department and said, we did all the work. Can you check on it? And then we can adopt it. That piece, when we said there's minimal work on you, just made this, I think I would say that's what made our project a success.
Indeed. Thank you, Seta. So as we went through this process, though, naturally, there were several challenges that arose. And one of the main ones was as we were talking with schools and getting back our PLO, ILO alignment maps, well, clearly there was a misalignment. There's many ways that this occurred. Sometimes there was no obvious connection between what the PLO talked about and what the ILO did. And we'll also show you some pictures just to get a better idea. This concept where there's an oversaturation of potential alignments, like marking too many boxes. Again, we'll show you some images. Same thing, just irrelevant connections. Just you're finding completely different topics still being claimed as a clear connection. And same thing, just in general, seeing that there were several PLO or ILO maps. They had not been touched in a very long time, as many of us had indicated in the chat. So let's just take a quick look at some of these examples. The first of these would be a lack of connection between certain ILOs and PLOs with a program. So this one was taken from an English degree program at Pepperdine, where you'll see that there's elements such as numbers 5 and 6, where they just supposedly are not reflected in the program at all. Whereas when, in terms of the mission, we want to say each of our programs helps build our students towards these common outcomes. It doesn't sit right that, yeah, we're just completely missing two of our main elements. And one thing I should also clarify, just keep in mind that this is with our old ILOs. So that's where we saw so many of these problems. And same thing, here's an example of oversaturation from one of our doctoral programs, where you basically see that the faculty decided, well, every PLO essentially is related to every single ILO at the same time. And I remember seeing a comment in the chat saying, well, we ended up with situations where it almost felt like we had 48 extra elements on a rubric where this would have created such a situation. So oversaturation was a common situation too. Real quick, I see a question from Shanti. You raised your hand.
Yeah, I have a question. When you have the ILOs, do you also have like the 3 ways of introducing them, then assessing them, and then doing a corrective measure throughout the program, like using the Bloom's taxonomy hierarchy of student learning outcomes for the ILOs, or you just do it for for PLOs?
So Shanti, the great question, and we will come to that. We'll show you. We have 2 ways to be doing this. We are in the implementation phase, which means we'll come to that. But I'll show you after Terrence is done, with the misalignment of how we're capturing it. So yes, there are 2 ways to do it. You can do it based on proficiency of those alignments, or just to check, are we meeting it, yes or not? We'll get to that. And thank you for that question.
Yes, great question indeed. So again, yes, you'll sometimes have a challenge where someone says, yeah, everything is aligned with everything. And that becomes a workload issue. And same thing, is it really going to be aligned? Because as highlighted in this last example, this is from one of our teacher preparation programs. Sometimes you'll see that there are connections, again, between areas that are obviously not related. So again, this is a teacher preparation program. And we have a program learning outcome here talking about understanding and organizing subject matter for student learning, aka a teacher who teaches science should know science in the classroom. But then there's a connection to an ILO that talks about global awareness, in which case, if we were looking at this new mapping, there would be a little bit of confusion saying, well, how, logically, how are we bridging those 2 concepts together? Which again, it becomes important from our work to say, yeah, we do need to check these alignment maps and not just blindly give them out to the various schools and assume that whatever they've done is close enough. So another challenge that has arisen is also unclear roles on what's happening with ILO assessment. Part of it was encountered at Pepperdine and also discussed in literature, where just in general, all of us from different types of institutions have assessment placed in a certain office or department, but then maybe strategic goals and planning are either in the same department or a different department, and there starts to become ambiguity in terms of who does what. All right, so in Pepperdine's case, we are under the provost's office, so we do, have full responsibility over assessment. But then when it comes to saying, well, we're deriving learning outcomes due to our strategic goals and mission, which sits more under the president's office, that starts to become complicated, especially as different roles and areas evolve and people switch positions, people take on new responsibilities. And this is something, again, reflected in the literature. Another challenge is that in general, just for ILOs, there hasn't really been any standardized tools in the literature. While yes, ILOs are mentioned in research, it's more in a general sense saying, yeah, you should do ILO assessment. It's beneficial to your school, but not really talking about how exactly to approach it or addressing the challenges such as the ones that we just discussed. And thus, we have a gap in research, which hopefully in a few years, ourselves and our colleagues here get to look into and fill that in. But the main thing is what many institutions need is a clear roadmap for understanding how do you actually integrate ILO assessment into existing assessment. Which the last thing that also contributes to a lot of this lack of clarity and low guidance is just accrediting bodies are not very consistent when it comes to the ILO piece. We know that they talk about strategic plans or our missions and clearly reflecting our progress towards that. But when we're talking about the approach to that via ILOs, only 3 of the main accrediting bodies even mention ILOs as a term. But even between the 3 that do, as noted on the screen, there's just different types of resources that they have that may or may not be directly relevant to the usage of ILOs. And same thing, we have the other accrediting bodies who don't mention ILOs. They'll just, in general, say student outcomes, not even learning outcomes, without making any differentiation, which leaves many institutions open-ended on not knowing exactly how they should approach ILO assessment. So on that note, I'm going to be handing it back to you, Seta, to talk a little bit now. We're going to revisit Pepperdine's project and the end results.
Thank you, Terrence. One of the things I wanted to underscore is a point Terrence made is we noticed at different institutions, it would be great if you can build a systematic and a systemic approach to assessing ILOs. Otherwise, it will go through the cracks or it would be a siloed project. So we realized, I remember when I was pitching this, and for us, it was just a best practice. It wasn't a mandate from our accreditor. It wasn't something someone noticed. But as part of, we believe in student learning outcomes. We want to align it. We want to make sure that it's not just checking boxes. And this kind of fell on my lap. And I thought, how can we do this such that it's seamless? So it doesn't create extra work for everyone. So we looked at our assessment and already existing practices and found a solution. Otherwise, it would become a chore on its own, and the person who owns it, when they leave, they move, it will stay and it would be forgotten. So systemic and systematic approach will really help you be able to assess those. So revisiting our project, if you see, now we have 5 ILOs. And at the end of each one, just so you would see, we didn't lose any of our existing or previously existing 9 ILOs. We captured them because, as I mentioned, when they were 9, it had redundancy and which created its own challenges. With those 5, we were able to rephrase, wordsmith, such that the mission was linked, it wasn't lost. We didn't change anything, just compiled them into from 9 to 5. So the next is how did we do this? So how do we assess it seamlessly? So as you know, we already talked about when you update your PLO to ILO map, right? So you're looking at your program. Every program, it doesn't matter how many courses you have, it has its own program learning outcome. we went back and audited and aligned the PLO to the ILO. By we, as I said, we at the OIE office did the foundational work, sent it back to faculty, program directors, and said, your next meeting, can you spend 20 minutes, half an hour? Can you see if this still makes sense? Did you add a course? Did you remove a course? So it was a great exercise for everybody to audit in their own digestible piece instead of overwhelmingly looking at 92 programs. So the next step we did, because every PLO, right, gets assessed at one point, whether it's cyclical, annual, every other year, whatever your system is. So we thought all we have to do is go to that rubric of that PLO, and I'll show you images next. So you will see how we captured those. And we just modified the rubric to add an ILO line that it's already aligned with. So when you're assessing that PLO with the same rubric, you're either checking a box for that ILO and or adding proficiency for that ILO. So that ILO line just gets checked whether it is with certain proficiency criteria or without. All of a sudden, you have an ILO that's been assessed without doing extra work. So let's look at how we did this. So first, this is an updated PLO to an ILO map. If you look at that, you can see that for example, for PLO 5, it speaks to several ILOs. So this was our first step. So we go next, we see when are we assessing this PLO? Where is the rubric for that? So we went to that rubric and added, as you see at the bottom of the same existing rubric, which ILOs it spoke to. Here is a great place to answer Shanti's question. You could have just said yes, no, box, merge those, or keep your criteria. It's really up to you, and it could be based on the program, right? So this is where you're going to disaggregate, process, or be very specific. So for example, if this was for a faith outcome, I would have liked to see proficiency levels because it may have been very important for that program and for the ILO. But if it's basic skill or a core competency, you could probably just get away with it by saying, yes, we meet it, no, we don't meet it. So this is really personal for the program, for the leadership, for the purpose, but you can do it both ways. So next, we just want to show you combination. So once you updated your PLO to your ILO map, you look at whatever PLO it speaks to, you find that rubric and add a line or two. Practicality. Seamlessly now you have that. So then another thing we do at Pepperdine is we do annual assessment, right? Like all of you probably do it. Our annual, we call it annual achievement report. Next slide, Terrence. Is such a simple report. It's very practical. It's not for tens of pages. It doesn't have a lot. It has just overview of how many PLOs have been assessed, what the outcomes were. In the same existing form, we built in existing forms a column that had also the ILO. So now faculty could also list which ILO that PLO spoke to, and we have that data existing. And the second page of that annual assessment report, we added a line now. We said your reflection on the ILO. Faculty didn't really have to do that much extra work. So we embedded it on our existing practices, which really facilitated and got our buy-in for them with them. So thank you. And we will have an opportunity for question and answer because we tested a couple of things. So now that we built on our existing practices, we did all the work, we got the buy-in, updated, we're able to start capturing. Now what? Terrence?
Yes, thank you, Seta. So at this point, then, it was a matter of communicating with each of those assessment coordinators from Pepperdine schools that, okay, we have checked your PLO to ILO mapping. We have these updated annual student achievement reports. Now it's time to collect data. And I think the main thing to emphasize was, as Seta noted, since we are um, aligning the ILOs and PLOs and making sure that the assessment happens at the same time, to tell the faculty that, hey, for example, if you're assessing PLO 5, then naturally you'll also happen to assess ILO 2, instead of saying, well, you're assessing PLO 5 and you'll need to do some extra things on top of that to help assess ILO number 2. And thus, we are currently in the phase where each school is gathering data, and eventually we'll be taking a look at all of the annual student achievement reports that get collected to read the reflections and decide, okay, well, what is the finding from each of these schools? And what does it mean on our progress towards the ILOs that we had just newly minted? And of course, it's not just a matter of reading data and writing reports every single year. Oftentimes we'll need to do surveys, again, just on assessing our own process with the ILOs, making sure there's something that we could do more efficiently, or maybe even, and it relates to one of the questions I see that got entered in the chat. I'm seeing what other tools we could use, or maybe there's a new software. Some of us had seen Insights by Illumin, for example, software like that to see, okay, how can we maybe streamline the process using that kind of a tool?
And I want to add something to this also, again, building on existing practices. So whatever practice you have, I am sure there's a way to build this new thing within. The benefit of what I think we're able to accomplish is that in the past, ILOs or assessing ILOs were siloed projects, or they would take leadership, let's assess that and let's engage. And we forgot about that after 5 years, let's say. Whereas when we do it this way, every year, anyway, assessment is going on. You start capturing ILO, meeting expectations with the ILOs. And then every 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, whatever fits your timeline, your schedule, you could compile all of those and really demonstrate ILOs being met through so many different programs, or not met, but we're hoping that they are met. So that's another thing, is that now you're going to get this beautiful report that tells you so many stories and validates of which ILOs are being met through which programs. So, and it will be ongoing. I think at one point, once this is launched in 5-6 years, we'll have more data that we know what to do with. And maybe, at that time, we can get more into the proficiency levels of those. And as far as the software, we'll say that we're in the midst of transitioning, so maybe that would be another workshop. But the one software we're looking into, which is popular, but I can't speak to it yet because we haven't really tested it. It does have levels of outcomes. It could be specialized accreditor level, let's say, or a standard, or an ILO. So a lot of the newer, bigger assessment management system does have add-ons to embed that, especially if you're a large institution, right? We're lucky we're 10,000 students, but if you're one of the CSUs that have, 40, 50, 60, 100,000 students, you may need more of an automation into this, but it can work.
Yep. Awesome. Thank you, Seta. And I'm going to move on then. So after the next steps, though, we still have to think, whoops, sorry, I clicked too many times. Still having some thoughts about, what are some tips and tricks that we had learned after everything? I think part of this actually ties in really excellently to the keynote that we heard this morning, because those of us who did listen, we heard elements of organizational change and leadership. And some of these things also might seem so obvious or basic, but I think it still bears repeating. One is that when it came to the rollout of this project, more often than not, just infographics were much easier to understand or engage audiences with than just writing out reports. I mean, yes, we did have full reports written on our process so we could document the history, but when we have multiple schools to attend to and limited time to get an audience with each of them, making sure we compile things into infographics was always important. The other important element, though, was definitely pilot testing. We didn't want to just jump into this right away. And in a way, similar to what we heard in the keynote, where you have to find your guiding coalition, right? Those trusted few people who might understand your cause and give your testimony for why things work. That's what we did here in the pilot testing phase. We have close relationships with a couple of the schools at Pepperdine, mainly because we actually originally worked there. And since we know those people so well, it was much easier to get direct access and feedback and communication, and, and using that as a time to make adjustments and also, again, pass along the good word to the other schools.
And we don't need to lecture each other. We all know that any change that is not communicated well, tested well, will lose buy-in and credibility and trust. We wanted to make sure that we don't do that. So we took our time in soft launching this test from day one when the proposal started. More than reducing the ILOs in my head, I wanted to make sure that if and when it's reduced, how can we capture this seamlessly using existing models? So that type of problem solving will be so important, I think, and front load that on your workload, because then things will be so much easier. In fact, it will track excitement about getting this done, because many of us believe that we want to do this. It's just like impossible. So that's one of our tips.
Yes. Which, now diving a little bit deeper into the communication piece. Again, this seems like it's obvious, but it can still catch people off guard, even in the age of Zoom, where just team members' knowledge of available technology tools, whether it's for communication, presentation, or assessment, they may not always know the full suite that's available at your university. I'm remembering one of the distinct examples is one of our graduate schools. For the longest time, not until I had uh, come in and talked with them, didn't know we had an existing partnership with a tool that had, video assessment available, yet they were there trying to negotiate video assessment software on their own. Another piece would be also, can these tools be properly used? Because sometimes, uh, you know, when there's, for example, a presentation to schools about our plan to do ILO assessment, unfortunately, sometimes the technology piece may not necessarily be handled well, and the message gets lost to the audience because we spend more time having to deal with knowing how to communicate or display things than actually working on it. But I think overall, though, the most important piece is a communication plan. What we mean by that is just really thinking about what is the context surrounding each of the schools / departments, as well as the working styles and schedules. So one of the prime examples, I would say, we have a graduate school of education and psychology, and they tend to be active in the summer, as well as some of our other graduate programs. So we might say, okay, this could be a good time to send out communications regarding our ILO assessment. But hold on, we have our undergraduate faculty who basically are all on vacation for the most part during the summer. So we can't just send a university-wide message and assume everyone has that done. Same thing, suddenly in the month of August, the undergraduate faculty start, but certain graduate schools are actually taking their vacation specifically during that month. Therefore, it behooves us then to have that awareness of what happens in each part of the university and knowing, okay, can we afford to send out that mass email blast, or will we have to be intentional and actually set up a plan visually so we know we're walking through each piece by piece to make sure we're covering all of our bases and ensuring everyone hears what they need to.
Thank you, Terrence. That was wonderful, especially understanding, scanning your environment, understanding your institution. I mean, having that knowledge is key. So our next slide, we wanted to share with you some of the lessons that were confirmed and some of the lessons that were learned. It was so important, at least for our success, to make sure that from our Board of Regents to senior leadership, to the deans, that we were not touching our mission, but rather trying to interpret the mission better by reducing and wordsmithing our ILOs, reducing them so it's much easier to manage the assessment of them. So this was a lesson that was learned and confirmed, and we tested the waters within the first 6 months. As Terence was saying, the importance of the communication, and we see this in all leadership literature, how important communication is, but it's not just to communicate, knowing when and how, just understanding your culture within your institution really advances your campaign. And you will get the buy-in. As Terence said, had he reached out, for instance, for faculty when it's their only 2 weeks break, we may not have gotten good buy-in, and so on and so forth. And the third thing is that your big idea, if you can test one piece of it all the way through, it would probably, and call it pilot. Most folks don't mind if a pilot program fails. But if you launch everything and it fails, credibility and trust become such an issue. As you all know, in org change, that's how it works. So for us, we called it a pilot at the beginning, tested it that if this happens and we do it this way, we'll all like see a beautiful product at the end, and it worked.
Awesome. And for a couple of other lessons, one was thinking about making sure that ILOs do capture skills and values that are there for every student at the university. Something that we had found was, one, earlier you saw examples where some programs claimed, oh yeah, we just don't have any connection to a certain ILO, which again is problematic in terms of reflecting how that program can be related to the overall mission and strategy of the university. But also something that was notable to us as we reviewed the literature was that mentions of ILOs tended to be very centered on just undergraduate education. And in a sense, almost forgetting that, yes, there's graduate students who are attending this school as well. So remembering that, you know, we are a diverse population of both levels of degrees, and therefore we have to reflect all of those students was something important to consider. And I think last but not least, it goes without saying that, and as I said earlier, we're not just here to say, okay, coordinators, just align the maps, give them back to us, and we'll kind of let you handle everything on your own. You have to be there to do the work. You need to check the details, make sure things that make sense still do make sense, and the alignments are correct, because as you see, curriculum maps can change. Oftentimes, many times as programs were reviewing alignments, they started realizing, hey, it's not just the ILOs that needed to be updated. Now I'm looking at this PLO again, and actually we might need to change that as well. So, you know, that ended up sparking even more conversations with the schools, which luckily, right, is an opportunity for improvement. But again, yeah, this is not supposed to be a one-time effort that turns into a passive process, but an ongoing collaboration with each of our schools. Which, last but not least, just keep in mind, it's the theme of this conference and ideas for what we can do in the future. Something that we have taken a large interest in at Pepperdine is thinking about how we can actually put artificial intelligence and integrate it into this ILO assessment process. Currently, we have these initial ideas, but also we would love to hear from the audience about more. But one of them is, of course, right, PLOs and ILOs still come with a certain workload. So perhaps AI could be used to assess how much workload could be there in a given year of an assessment plan, and thus help us plan ahead. And also maybe even when we're trying to judge ambiguous cases between a PLO or ILO's alignment, AI analysis could help tell us, okay, yeah, this is a strong connection, or maybe this is where ambiguity could be resolved. And lastly, there is the idea of constructing insights where we as humans might be able to see one thing from the results that we get, but the AI tool could provide an alternative perspective on student learning outcomes and their achievement that we would not have seen before. So yeah, I'm not sure if you want to add anything about this whole AI piece, Sarah. No. All right. Well, on that note then, we just want to thank you all for the time you had to attend our session. We are really thankful for this all and wanted to open it up to any questions that you all have for us. Yes, Julie, I see you have your hand raised, and then we'll get Jill's question in the chat after.
Yeah, so we're in the midst of this, so this is incredibly helpful. Thank you very much. I'm, trying to figure out how we maybe steal some of your ideas. So I was looking at, I really liked that very straightforward kind of spreadsheet where you're like, this is where they put their data in. Is there a place for reflection, or and maybe that just kind of wasn't? And I was curious, like how they, how they have the opportunity to reflect.
So this form is an abbreviated assessment achievement annual report. So this first page, and faculty can add as many pages as they want, but the first page is more of an overview and data focus. But the second page and the third page, so this is the second page, we embedded this question in the existing report type of a template. So because this is new, we don't have specific per each ILO because we don't know which PLOs have been, but this is an opportunity for faculty to discuss after their annual assessment annually with their faculty during their meeting, and they can add whatever they found out of this. And I don't know if that was your question, but this is where their narrative will come.
Yeah, and I would also add is that the questions you see on the screen, they're only some of the questions that we are asking to the programs on this achievement report. So there's additional things about next steps or areas of improvement that the program sees for itself.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Also, they have, we request the departments to add, in case we don't have it in our record, example of the rubric they used. So the pages 3 and 4 have additional information. But the idea was not to overwhelm faculty, but have a place for them in case, and more like talking points for them.
Yeah, awesome. Great question. So yeah, let's get to Jill's question in the chat, who was asking, do you map co-curricular outcomes to the ILOs?
All right. Who asked that question?
Yeah, Jill Whiteman.
Jill, I just wanted to say, by the way, this is a side work we're doing, and we have a special visit coming up in 7 weeks. Not that I'm counting, but that is on our horizon. And one of the things that I'm trying to do in the past, our Office of Institutional Effectiveness was established, founded, and it's been 10 years. So we ourselves had to revisit our objectives and our 4 pillars, because I feel at least the work we've been doing in the last 10 years has to do more with educational effectiveness. So that led me even this year to create projects to look at all our non-curricular areas. So within the non-curricular areas, we're looking into 2 things. Are they co-curricular or completely non-curricular? So yes, the expectation is we want to have mapping, because no matter what we do, from our integrated marketing system to registrar, the whole idea is to serve our students. So our objectives should also align with our ILOs. Are we doing them as we speak? No, except for 2, because they are up for review. But that's the intention.
If I could just chime in, I was going to say, we were really struggling to figure out how to kind of get our arms around co-curricular, what were we assessing things to? And when we started assessing them to our ILOs, it helped us really think about our co-curricular assessment in a more productive way.
So you can consider that we're also doing soft launching with that. So for example, for our international programs, just met this week, and we said, those are their revised objectives of the program. How are they linking? And we saw a very strong link to at least 3 ILOs. So they are doing it. And one of the, I think, gifts that we have, that we don't need to do all of this the same day. So we can slowly build into that, but that's absolutely our next project.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, awesome. So we had another question in the chat from Amy, who was asking, yeah, at our institution, we map our course learning outcomes to the ILOs. And that's a project they had started this year after consulting with the VPI. Previously, they had not routinely assessed ILOs, so they were asking us, do we have advice for how to align program learning outcomes with this whole process? And
I'm happy to tackle this one. So the way I look at this, anytime you're assessing any course learning outcome, that course learning outcome should definitely be matching or meeting or aligning with the overall program learning outcome. So let's take a program. You have a program, if you're a graduate school, you have 15 courses, your undergraduate school, it doesn't matter, your GE, your core. So that higher mid-level, which is the program, should have its outcome, correct? So when you're building courses, your course learning outcomes, whether we have 1, 2, 3, 10, should align to at least one PLO. When you do that, that's why we never went down to the course level, because everything should be captured somewhere in the program learning outcomes. So basically, there should be a curriculum map for your PLO to your CLO. And the minute you do that level, which we expect most programs to have it, even if it's not fully aligned, then all you have to think about is the PLO, not at the course level, but rather at the program level, which in turn is aligned with the ILO. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you. We just initiated, I actually created alignment grids for each course SLO and mapped it to the institution SLO, skipping that program in between, just to, again, not create additional workload on faculty. So I just wasn't sure if that was still, still good best practice.
Amy, everything is best practice, but the problem with that approach, there could be flawed outcomes, and I'll explain why. Because if you think about it, the course learning outcomes, do you have standardized syllabus that you give to your adjunct? Or if it's not standardized, many times faculty who are teaching a course may not really teach all those course learning outcomes. But every course, when it's being offered initially within a program, had to have had a curriculum map to the PLO, right? So let's say you're starting a program, 12 courses, you're saying this course, that course, so you have that curriculum map aligned at the beginning. Now you're doing a very difficult work by aligning your course learning outcomes to the ILO, but that would be very difficult to manage if you are not a small school or a small program, and it could be flawed because you have so many. Then you're going to end up with 100 course learning outcomes. Automatically, it's going to be overwhelming. I would suggest that you would do it through the program learning outcome. And that's a great exercise for a retreat where faculty go, look at this, you teach this course, you teach this course. Does it still apply? But anything that works for you works. But is it really sustainable? Is it manageable?
Thank you. I appreciate your insight.
Yes. Now we have an interesting comment from Shanti, and I can respond to this. So talking about, faculty have trouble with, standardized syllabus templates, talking about academic freedom, infringing on that. Is there more you wanted to say about that before I respond, Shanti?
No, it's the same thing. we have our syllabi are all over the place. And even certain standardized language like, the disability, things like that, we have to go through a faculty senate approval process to put that in place. So having a standardized syllabus with, like laying out the learning outcomes and, putting rubrics and measurable outcomes, etc. in place is going to be a bit of a battle. And so I am a little bit worried about that. Just wanted to throw it out there. But if you have a solution for me, I would love to hear it.
Yeah, the solution, it's funny, when I started talking about this, the first thing that faculty, that's why I was thinking about Amy's approach would be a big challenge, to go through the faculty, and it would be flawed because if you're skipping that step, then you can never assure that those CLOs are being met. But for the program learning outcome, most programs are faculty initiated, led, approved. That work had been done. The problem is for existing programs that haven't been audited, and it's best practice to go, and it's worth the time to go back and revisit those. That's why PLO to ILO, I feel, hits your target sooner and better.
Yeah, and another thing that I would also add is we recently had one of our schools where they realized there was inconsistent syllabi for one course, was reinforcing this message that, number one, we're not trying to control how the faculty teach a course. We're telling them you need to just make sure that we're all working towards common outcomes. And it's not that we and the Office of Institutional Effectiveness are saying this is the outcome you need to teach to. These are outcomes that are determined by faculty. So truly, all right, this is all faculty led, and we are aiming more towards consistency and being able to meet the goals of the program more so than saying, oh, yeah, you can't just teach it this specific way.
We have an added layer because we have Middle States requires us to have the ILOs, and they've prescribed the ILOs that they want us to actually see. So that's our accrediting bodies already told us that. On top of that, we have general education outcomes that the SUNY, our SUNY Central has already prescribed to us. So that also is part of the whole curriculum thing. So between the two, accrediting regulatory agencies, we basically have it set up. In spite of that, we cannot do the templates or the standardized syllabi because it's a faculty academic infringement situation. So we're trying to battle our way through that one.
Shanti, it is a lot of work. Terrence, can you stop sharing for a second? It's our last few minutes. Shanti, as you know, nothing is really that easy, but one of the things that we made sure that faculty realize that they still have their freedoms. We're not saying that. We never went there. And we're saying the work is being done. We're adding a lot. So with every thought I had in the back of my head, what would faculty say? I knew that. I lived it. I was faculty. So I knew that. So not that it was I would say it was a strategy. It was very intentional. And going back to Amy's point, I'm kind of very cautious about the course learning outcomes because I have seen syllabi for courses that I teach, and the course learning outcomes are either not measurable or flawed. And then I also know they don't really do those. So your best bet is usually your PLO and finding that signature assignment for that PLO. I mean, we're not talking about in this presentation about how to align those, because that's also critical. Finding your signature assignment or assignments to assess that PLO is critical. Otherwise, you'll have great data, but it will be flawed. This was really fun. Yes, same, Sean.
Yeah,
Thank
the dark
you
side.
so much for everyone. I want to take a moment to share that Terrence, I served on his dissertation committee, so we're very proud that he's a great talent in the assessment and accreditation world, and I'm happy to be presenting with him.
Thank you, Seta, and it's an honor that I even got to be graced with Seta's wisdom after all of her experience in this field. So yeah, and we're also blessed by all of you showing up. So thank you all again. Wishing you a great rest of the day, and same thing, rest of the symposium.
Thank you for attending. Thank you so much.